Every time someone says no to you, well, it's not because they don't want it. It's because their brain is trying to protect them. In this deep dive, you'll learn how the brain actually decides to say yes and how to use that to your advantage.
Yeah, I mean, think about the last time you pitched a brilliant idea to your boss or tried to convince a relative to drop a bad habit. You probably had all the facts,
Well,
right?
totally.
Right.
Your logic was completely airtight, and yet they still shut you down entirely. Today, we're decoding exactly why that happened.
Right, because we are unpacking this incredibly fascinating stack of research today. It deconstructs the hidden biological barriers to persuasion and, the real neurological weight of our social circles.
Yeah, we're looking at how to navigate the human brain's remarkably strict defense systems. I like to imagine the word no, like a medieval castle's drawbridge.
Ooh, that's a good visual.
Right. When you approach with a new pitch and that drawbridge suddenly slams up in your face, it's not because the castle inherently hates you as a visitor. It is simply because the internal alarms went off.
Exactly. And if we run with that drawbridge analogy, what's fascinating is that the drawbridge isn't actually controlled by logic or reason at all. It is controlled by ancient biological programming.
Which is so counterintuitive because we're always taught that persuasion is about force, like it's about having the most dominant personality or being the loudest in the room.
Or just having the most aggressive, undeniable argument. But biologically speaking, that approach is entirely counterproductive.
It really is.
Persuasion isn't about being the loudest. It is entirely about mastering the hidden fine print of human biology.
Right, because to understand how to finally get to a yes, we first have to understand the actual biological mechanics of a no.
Which means looking at friction.
Yes, exactly. The research makes this incredibly crucial distinction right out of the gate. Persuasion is not the act of convincing or selling. Persuasion is the strategic removal of friction.
It is entirely about friction.
Yeah.
Like when you get a no in a business deal or, even in a personal negotiation with your partner, it is rarely a rejection of the specific idea itself.
The idea might actually be incredibly beneficial for them.
Exactly. But the no is a subconscious defense mechanism. See, the human brain's primary job, above all else, is to protect the status quo.
Because of the calorie burn, right?
Right.
Yeah.
To understand why, you have to look at how the brain consumes energy. The brain burns a massive amount of your body's calories. Predictability, the status quo, well, that conserves those calories because the brain doesn't have to work hard to process the familiar.
But unpredictability, or sudden change, requires building entirely new neural pathways.
And that burns energy. So to the ancient brain, predictability literally equals survival.
Okay, let's unpack this. The material uses these incredibly vivid concepts, like your default code or your money box. Let's define what those actually are.
Sure, so a money box isn't a physical thing. It's a metaphor for the internal limits and belief systems a person has built up over their entire lifetime.
Like an internal thermostat.
Exactly like a thermostat. If someone grew up believing that making $50,000 a year is normal and making more than that requires unethical behavior, well, that belief is coded into their thermostat.
And the people who taught them that, like their parents, early mentors, or society, those are what the research calls their architects.
Precisely. Those architects installed the default code. Now imagine you walk in and present a completely legitimate, ethical solution that would easily double their income.
Just blowing past the limits of their internal money box.
Right. But when you present a reality that contradicts that default code, the person experiences cognitive dissonance. The tension between what they believe and what you are offering creates intense friction.
And what the neurobiology highlights here is that this mental tension isn't just a vague, abstract feeling of unease. It physically occurs in a specific part of the brain.
Yes, in the anterior cingulate cortex.
The ACC, the brain's literal error and conflict detector.
Exactly. The anterior cingulate cortex acts as the alarm system. If your proposal requires someone to change how they see themselves or take a risk their original architects warned them against, they will experience actual physical discomfort.
Wait, actual discomfort, like it literally hurts.
Yeah, to the brain, this cognitive dissonance doesn't feel like a harmless difference of opinion. It feels like a literal physical threat to their safety because it disrupts that calorie-conserving status quo.
Wow. So because of that biological threat response, they'll subconsciously sabotage the deal.
Or they will miraculously find a perfectly logical-sounding excuse to walk away from the table just to make that physical discomfort stop.
So if my instinct when an alarm goes off is to just back up, present more data, and use better logic, you're saying logic doesn't even work once the drawbridge is up.
It really doesn't.
So if I pitch a brilliant new strategy to a client and they say no, it's not necessarily a flaw in my idea, but a flaw in how fast I triggered their anterior cingulate cortex.
What's fascinating here is that you've hit on the exact mechanism of why most logical pitches fail. You moved too fast and triggered the dissonance.
You spooked the system.
Right. Once the anterior cingulate cortex sounds the alarm, the brain literally routes energy away from the logical processing centers and into defensive posturing. The brain is terrified of the risk associated with sudden change.
So how do you get around that?
High-level persuasion requires a technique called incremental pacing. You have to lead the brain forward one small, safe, familiar step at a time.
So that the cognitive dissonance never actually reaches a breaking point?
Exactly. You have to keep the alarm bells entirely quiet so the logic centers stay online.
That brings up a massive question. If moving too quickly is what triggers the brain's alarms and shuts down logic, how exactly do we safely bypass those defenses?
Right. How do we present ideas without looking like a threat?
Exactly. And this brings us to the actual mechanics of getting a yes. The research points to two major tools we can use here: anchoring and something called the oxytocin bypass.
Oh, I love the oxytocin bypass. But yeah, let's start with anchoring.
Let's do anchoring first, because this fundamentally changes how we present the cost of our ideas.
So anchoring is built entirely on the contrast principle. We have to understand that the human brain literally cannot perceive value in a vacuum. It is incapable of it.
It needs something to compare it to.
The brain absolutely requires a reference point to understand if something is good, bad, expensive, or cheap. If you just walk into a room and present your solution alongside its price tag first, the brain immediately goes into a defensive posture.
It looks at the price and asks, what is this new thing going to cost me? It focuses entirely on loss, and loss triggers friction.
But the strategy completely flips if you present the cost of inaction first.
That is the core of the strategy right there.
It really is. If you anchor the conversation on the tangible cost of their current problem before you ever mention your solution, their brain asks a completely different question.
It asks, what am I losing by staying exactly where I am?
Right. It shifts the focus from the pain of buying to the pain of staying stagnant. There is a brilliant mathematical breakdown of this in the material.
Oh yeah, the consultant example. Walk us through that.
Okay. So let's say you are a consultant trying to sell a system upgrade for $2,000. If you just ask for the $2,000 up front, it feels like an expense.
And the brain's alarm goes off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you first walk the client through their own data and demonstrate that their current inefficient system is actively losing them $10,000 every single month, well, suddenly your $2,000 service isn't a cost anymore.
It feels like an $8,000 profit.
Exactly. You have effectively flipped the return on investment, the ROI, from a question of cost to a question of gain.
You vividly articulated the massive leak in their boat, establishing a $10,000 anchor before you ever offered them the $2,000 plug.
And because of that, the brain no longer sees you as a threat trying to take its resources. It sees you as a lifeline preserving them.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because lowering that friction isn't just about the math, right? There is a profound neurochemical component to this.
Oh, absolutely.
We've talked about dopamine and other deep dives, that seeking chemical that hooks our attention. But the data shows that actual lasting persuasion relies on a completely different neurochemical.
Oxytocin.
Yes, oxytocin.
Oxytocin is frequently referred to as the trust molecule. It is deeply tied to human bonding, and it is released when the brain feels a profound sense of safety, being understood, and belonging.
So how does that apply to a pitch or a negotiation?
Well, the way you physically approach a conversation dictates whether you trigger oxytocin or a stress chemical like cortisol. If you go into a negotiation acting like what the material calls a predator, like pushy, aggressive, speaking quickly, desperate to close a deal, you trigger the other person's amygdala.
The primal fear center.
Right.
Yeah.
And once the amygdala senses a predator, the drawbridge slams shut, and the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain responsible for rational thought and logic, is essentially bypassed.
To put that in an everyday context, it's the exact difference between a pushy car salesman trying to force you into a purchase versus a calm mechanic pointing out a dangerous leak in your brake line.
That's a perfect analogy.
The salesman is acting like a predator. They want something from you, so your amygdala is screaming at you to guard your wallet.
But the mechanic is acting like what the research calls a diagnostic specialist. You inherently trust the mechanic because they aren't pushing. They are calmly diagnosing a reality that affects your safety.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, acting as that diagnostic specialist is what allows you to use a biological feature called mirror neurons.
Yes, mirror neurons are huge here. Humans are hardwired to physically mirror the emotions and states of the people in front of them. It's an empathy reflex.
So if you act anxious and predatory, their mirror neurons replicate that anxiety.
And boom, you trigger their amygdala. But if you act completely calm, detached from the outcome, and genuinely curious about diagnosing their problem, their mirror neurons replicate your calm.
And when the brain feels that calm and feels deeply understood by the diagnosis, it releases a wave of oxytocin.
And that oxytocin is the bypass.
That's incredible.
It really is. The chemical literally signals the amygdala to stand down and lower its guard.
Yeah.
And only then, only when the amygdala is quieted by that trust molecule, can your strategy, your math, and your logic actually be heard.
And processed by their prefrontal cortex.
Exactly. Authority, framed as a calm diagnosis rather than an aggressive demand, is the ultimate friction remover. It provides the exact neurochemical safety the brain needs to lower the drawbridge.
Okay, so we've just decoded how to bypass biological friction when pitching a client or negotiating a deal.
Right.
But what happens when you take this exact same biology and apply it to your own life? What happens when the no comes from the people who love you most?
Oof, yeah, that's where it gets complicated.
Because the research shifts gears here to reveal a resistance that is far more insidious than a stubborn client. What happens when we are the ones trying to grow and our own friends or family are the ones pushing back?
This is what the text vividly refers to as the social shadow. And it is, without a doubt, the most powerful external force in human psychology.
The social shadow, it sounds ominous.
Well, it is this invisible environmental gravity that is constantly attempting to pull you back to the baseline level of your original circle.
And just like the resistance to a sales pitch, this comes entirely down to ancient biology, right? The belonging code.
Exactly. We have to remember the evolutionary timeline here. For roughly 200,000 years of human history, survival was never about being the strongest, most independent individual on the savannah.
It was entirely about belonging to the tribe.
Yes, if you stood out, caused trouble, or were cast out of your hunter-gatherer tribe, you didn't just feel lonely, you starved, you died, period.
So because of that brutal evolutionary history, your primal brain is neurologically hardwired to prioritize fitting in over standing out.
And here is the truly terrifying part of that code. The brain will prioritize fitting in, even if fitting in means staying broke, staying in a toxic relationship, or staying stagnant in your career.
Wow. Because standing out, even for a positive reason like massive success, still registers to the ancient brain as dangerous isolation.
Exactly.
And the material explains that social groups operate on a biological principle of homeostasis. That's the innate tendency of any system to maintain a stable, familiar internal environment.
Right, so when you decide you want to rewrite your code,
Yeah.
increase your income, or break a generational family pattern, your sudden growth creates massive cognitive dissonance for everyone around you.
Because your new habits become a blinding mirror reflecting their lack of growth.
Exactly. And just like we discussed with the anterior cingulate cortex earlier, that dissonance is highly uncomfortable for their brains. They are experiencing an error in their own status quo.
So to resolve their own mental tension and restore the homeostasis of the group, they will subconsciously attempt to reset you back to the baseline.
Yeah. You will see this manifest as guilt tripping, like a family member sighing and saying, I guess you're too good for us now, or you don't forget where you came from.
Or it might take the form of passive-aggressive sabotage, where friends constantly doubt your new business strategies or hyperfixate on every possible risk to scare you out of it.
Right, the classic crab mentality.
Wait, I really want to push back on this. Because when a family member tells you that starting a business is a terrible idea and you're going to lose everything, it feels incredibly toxic.
It absolutely feels that way.
It feels like they are actively trying to ruin your life. Is this crab mentality, the idea of crabs in a bucket pulling the escaping crab back down into the trap? Is it truly malicious?
This raises an important question, and it is vital to separate the behavior from the intent. In the vast majority of cases, it is not malicious. It is an automatic biological survival reflex.
So they aren't plotting against you.
No, their brains are reacting to a perceived threat to the tribe's stability. They are subconsciously pulling you back to soothe their own anterior cingulate cortex alarms. Your sameness feels like safety to them.
But the real danger here isn't just their reaction, right? It's how your brain processes their reaction.
Yes, the social pain.
This part of the research completely blew my mind.
It is profound.
Hmm.
Neurologically speaking, the brain processes social rejection in the exact same physical area it processes physical pain.
In the anterior cingulate cortex again.
Yes, when you start to outgrow your old group and they push back, your brain triggers a pain response that feels identical to a literal physical injury.
That is wild.
It explains why so many incredibly high performers quit right before they break through to the next level.
Mm.
It is rarely because they lack the logic, the skills, or the strategy.
It is because they literally cannot handle the physical, neurological pain of being the only one in the room who has changed.
Exactly. To make that deep, agonizing pain stop, they ultimately choose the safety of belonging over the reality of abundance.
They choose the safety of belonging over abundance just to make the physical pain stop. That is a sobering reality to face.
It really is.
And it perfectly transitions us into the final section of our analysis today, environment architecture. Because if the biological pull of the tribe is that deeply hardwired into our survival instincts, and if it is physically painful to break away, we cannot simply willpower our way through it.
No, you can't just grit your teeth and ignore hundreds of thousands of years of human biology. Willpower is a finite resource, but environment is constant.
You have to treat your environment like a highly guarded business asset. If your current circle has a low ROI for your mental health or your ambitions, you must engage in intentional environment architecture.
And the foundational rule here is the proximity effect. We've all heard the old motivational cliche that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Right, but the science points out that this is not just a self-help quote.
No, it is a neurological fact driven by those mirror neurons we discussed earlier. If you surround yourself with people who have small limits, small money boxes, and high anxiety, your mirror neurons will automatically and subconsciously replicate those exact limits in your own brain.
Which means sometimes you have to initiate what the text calls strategic isolation. It sounds harsh, but there are seasons where you must go dark.
You really do. You actually have to limit your exposure to those old influencers, the old architects, while your new neural pathways are still fragile.
You have to protect the new code while your brain is still compiling it.
Exactly. And nature abhors a vacuum. Once you create that space, you have to intentionally build the new tribe.
You have to actively seek out an environment where your new massive level of growth isn't seen as a threat, but is just the baseline normal for everyone else in the room.
And when you do that, the social shadow flips its polarity. It stops being a heavy drag, pulling you backward into old habits, and it becomes a powerful motor pushing you forward.
Because in this new tribe, fitting in and satisfying that belonging code actively requires you to grow.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean practically? To help us actually engineer this, the material outlines a box audit, 3 specific diagnostic checks to identify the hidden biological leaks in our social environment.
These are so practical.
Let's walk through them. First is the energy audit. Look at the 5 people you speak to the most on a weekly basis. After interacting with them, is your internal battery charged or is it drained?
Because constantly drained energy isn't just fatigue. It is a major physiological symptom of subconscious social sabotage. Your brain is literally burning calories, managing their cognitive dissonance.
Wow. And right alongside that is the crab identification.
Yes. This requires brutal honesty. Ask yourself, who in your life currently benefits from you staying exactly as you are? Who feels safer or superior when you play small?
Identifying those specific individuals is the absolute first step to setting the necessary boundaries to protect your new baseline.
Right. And that brings us to the final check, the ceiling check. You have to look at your immediate circle and ask, is there anyone here who is 5 to 10 years ahead of where I want to be?
And I have to admit, when I first read this, it hit hard. Because if you do that ceiling check and the answer is no, if no one is ahead of you, it means you are the smartest, most successful person in the room.
Which feels amazing.
Right. Honestly, yeah. Being the smartest in the room feels fantastic to the human ego. It feels incredibly safe. You never experience dissonance. But according to the data, it is a terrible trap.
It really is. It is a massive vulnerability for your growth.
Yeah.
Because there is absolutely no one there for your mirror neurons to latch onto to model a higher standard.
Exactly. Identifying these leaks like the energy drains, the crabs pulling you down, the low ceilings stunting your mirror neurons, that is how you protect the ROI of your life.
You cannot successfully persuade others, and you certainly cannot elevate yourself if your own social environment is constantly triggering your brain's alarm systems.
It's incredible how all of these seemingly disparate concepts connect. We started by looking at how to safely bypass the alarms to get a yes in a business negotiation, and we've ended up dissecting the neurobiology of our closest family dynamics.
But the logical through line is undeniable, isn't it?
It really is. Persuasion, whether it's persuading a skeptical client to buy a service or persuading your own brain to step into a new level of growth, is never about brute force. It is never about just having the smartest, most logical argument.
It is entirely about managing the brain's ancient, calorie-conserving threat detection systems. It is about managing the amygdala's fear of the aggressive pitch and soothing the anterior cingulate cortex's paralyzing fear of cognitive dissonance and social isolation.
So, as you head out into your week, I want you to view your next negotiation or even your next frustrating social conflict through a completely different lens. Stop seeing it as a battle of logic or wills.
See it as an exercise in diagnosing biological friction.
Exactly. Remember the drawbridge. If they are saying no, their ancient alarms are ringing. Your job is to anchor the value, flip the ROI from cost to gain, and offer the profound safety of a specialist so that their brain finally has the neurochemical permission it needs to lower the drawbridge.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, there's one final lingering question stemming from these biological realities that I think we all need to deeply consider.
What's that?
Well, we've clearly established that our primal brains are hardwired to prioritize belonging over abundance, and that we process social rejection as actual physical pain.
Right.
So what happens to a society that increasingly isolates itself behind digital screens? By cutting ourselves off from the messy, physical reality of real-world tribes, are we inadvertently making ourselves even more vulnerable to bad ideas and manipulation simply because our brains are completely starved for that physical oxytocin belonging trigger?